workshop this morning. This is How to Get Your Book Published, hosted by Erika and Fabian. Erika is a writer and photographer. She's had her books published by well-renowned publishers like Putnam, Valentine, and Photo, and even Harlequin. Her 26th book, Liar's Paradise, is currently available online and in paperback, and it's an autobiographical novel about love and survival under Nazi occupation. So thank you so much for coming to present today. And
you know, it's funny, I expected a full room. Last night I gave a talk and the room was full. So I thought, gee, how many people want to get published? What you see here is basically not all the books I have worked on, but quite a number of them, as you can see. But what I will talk about is basically the transition from publishing with a publisher to self-publishing, because I think in today's world, things have changed a lot about publishing, and I want to address that because it's important for you to know that it's like taking the power back. You know, before coming here, I looked up the history of publishing because I was curious myself. Where did it start? And actually, publishing existed, storytelling existed as long as man is alive. People told stories at the fireplace, invented stories to teach kids, to teach adults. So it's in human nature to tell stories. In the Chinese culture, they started publishing books something like 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. They were carving books into stones. They were carving books into wax and then printing them. So printing is nothing new. What was new, what became very new, is in the 1500s, I think 1540 something, I'm very bad with names and numbers, but Gutenberg, a German basically a German scientist and artist, created the printing press. So now, instead of priests sitting in monasteries and handwriting the Bible, and very few people, ordinary people, knew how to write, including rulers. They had scribes to write for them. All of a sudden, they could print what they wrote. And that changed the whole world of storytelling. There were many authors in England, in France, who handwrote their first books and handwrote and tried to spread the word, but now they could print their books. So books became the entertainment of the European world, basically, because they could now sell the books, read the books. And what was very interesting is that after Gutenberg invented the printing press, very smart businessmen became publishers. They came and said to authors, we can publish your book by the hundreds. We can sell your books. So all you have to do is write your books, and we'll give you a percentage of the sales. That's how you can support yourself by your writing. So from about the 1500s, book publishing became an industry. Authors wrote, they gave it to publishers. If the publishers accepted their books, fine, they were published and sold. Around the 19th century or early 20th century, there were some other very smart people who said to the authors, the publisher is not giving you enough money. We'll represent you. And we'll take care of everything you need to do about publishing. All you need to do is write the book, we'll sell it for you for the highest advance. And advance means the publisher gives you money in advance of publishing your book, so you have the money to stay at home and write, to live on. And we'll take care of everything, and all you have to do is write, and we'll get a percentage of your sales. Used to be something like 2% and 3%. then it became 5%, today it's like 12%. These people are called the agents. When I came into the publishing world, let's see, actually I started, come closer. I mean, you're all spread out. Come. When I came into the publishing world, no, let me go back and say that I wrote my first story when I was about, I don't know, 6 years old, and I was first year in school. And I am originally from Hungary, so my Hungarian teacher, literature teacher, went to see my mother and said, I want to follow this child's career because she's going to become a writer. Except writing is a very lonely thing, and I was writing stories anyway, and I enjoyed acting far more than writing. I was acting, I was a dancer, I performed a lot in plays, in school plays. I was hired to perform. So I figured writing is something I can always do, forget it. I was an actress. And then I became a director. And then I had my own acting school in San Francisco. So writing was always in the background. And whenever I had 2 sons, and when they were little, I wrote stories for them. Invented all sorts of wild kid stories. And I just figured one of these days, somehow, I will write a book or something, but it wasn't anything, it was such a part of my life and such a part of me that I didn't worry about publishing. And then I was married, I had 2 children, my husband liked to get jobs in different parts of the world. So we lived in Peru, we lived in Mexico City. And in Mexico City, I was in my late 20s when, because I was modeling and doing commercials, I had a photographer who took pictures of me for my portfolio. And one day she said, this National Geographic photographer is in town. He's doing an article in Mexico City, and let's go have dinner with him. She invited a whole bunch of her models and friends. And I said, what's National Geographic? And my husband said, are you crazy? It's the greatest magazine in the world. I said, oh, let's go. As luck would have it, my husband was sitting at one end of this long table, and I ended up sitting next to this National Geographic photographer. And we started to talk during dinner and didn't stop for 3 hours. He was much older than me. He was around 49 and I was 29. And a very good looking man, very handsome man, and very charming. And he had so many interesting things to say about life and stories that I was absolutely fascinated. And then he said to me during the conversation, you know, I'm having a lot of trouble getting the right pictures in Mexico City. I have a photographer, a Mexican photographer helping me, but I'm not getting the right pictures. I said, what do you need? He said, I'm an actress, everybody knows me, I can get into any place I want. Tell me what you need. So he said he needed unusual buildings, unusual interiors, unusual neighborhoods. I said, no problem. So I started working with him. My kids were in school all day. And also I had a nanny for them. So if needed, she could pick them up, take them home, take them to their classes. So I was free. And I started working with him, taking him around to everywhere in the city that I knew. And because I was a model, they would always take me to unusual locations for backgrounds. So I knew very well the interesting buildings, the interesting locales. When he sent the pictures back to the Geographic, the routine was that a photographer would shoot maybe 30 rolls at a time out of 500 rolls of film that he would have with him and send it back to the Geographic once a week. So he started sending back rolls and rolls of film to Washington, D.C. And somebody at the main office, of course, would give him feedback. This worked, this didn't work, go back, reshoot, we need more of this. They wrote back to him and said, these are fabulous pictures. We've never seen the city like this, continue. So obviously I was doing some good. I finally, at the end of his assignment, I said to him, you know, I love working with you. If you could get an assignment to go and do an assignment in Hungary, I'd love to go back because I left Hungary when I was 16 and now I'm 28, 29, and I'd love to see what the country really looks like. And he went back to Washington. He said to me, that's almost impossible because there's already a photographer working on Hungary, on an article on Hungary, and we never switch photographers. I said, try. So he goes back to Washington and finds out that this particular photographer, who happened to be a friend of his, had a pregnant wife. He hated working in Hungary because he wasn't getting anywhere with the communists. And he gladly switched, and they talked to the head of the department and said, can Albert Mulvey go back to Hungary instead of me? They gave him the assignment. He called me in Mexico City and said, you're on. So the original assignment in Mexico City was in the spring. That fall, in September, end of September, I headed for Hungary with him. We got into Hungary, and I only had a 3-week visitor's visa. So the first lesson for me was how to stay in Hungary 2.5 months, 3 months to complete this assignment. We arrived in the most beautiful hotel at Hilton in Budapest. And the clerk not only checked us in, but handed us a telegram which said, make sure you photograph the bauxite mines and the railroads in Hungary. I took one look at that and I said, you know, you want to go to jail in this country? This is crazy. I knew, everybody knew that the bauxite mines were not bauxite, they were uranium mines. A highly secretive operation in Hungary. They sent the uranium to Russia. And the railroads were off the chart because they were also, you know, that's the heart of the country, how you get transported from one place to another. The country wasn't going to let people look at that. So I said, let's make an appointment immediately. We have to go to see the Minister of Culture anyway. Let's take this telegram with us. So we went. He had an interpreter with him, a Hungarian woman who originally moved to Canada, moved back to Hungary. So he had his Hungarian interpreter. I spoke fluent Hungarian. And Al, even though he had been born in Hungary, he left Hungary when he was a child, he could only speak like 2 words in Hungarian. So I was his interpreter. And we sat down and we talked, and I handed the minister this telegram and I said, I only have a 3-week visa. If you give me a 3 months stay visa, I'll make sure that he doesn't go near any railroad station or bauxite mines, because I know the rules. I was born here. He said, you got it. We left his office with a permit for me to stay in the country 3 months. That was a very important lesson for me because I was talking to the minister of the country, but I had to handle the situation on a very personal level. And because I did, he did. And over the years, I always took 3 suitcases on assignments. One was for kings, ministers, you know, something dressy. And then we would go into villages, where into mud, into rain, and I would dress like the villagers because I wanted to make sure that I don't look like a tourist. That was one of the important things, to blend in. The other important thing was that every time we met people, I I would try to ask them about their lives, their children, their families, because that's what they asked me. And I knew that this is the way to get real information from them. If you talk to somebody for 5 minutes and you say, how many children do you have? Are you married? What is your profession? Can I take your picture? They would say yes, because you have already established contact with them. So if you're working on a book, for example, and you want information, and you want personal information from what's going on?
Someone's joining in virtually.
What?
Someone is like joining in virtually.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's how you do it. You first establish a relationship with people. And you get a great deal of information that way. Anyway, when all this was happening, in the process of accompanying Al as his interpreter, and I was organizing our schedule and I was driving half the time. So I became a field producer at National Geographic. And one of those trips, he said to me, I told him I was writing and showed him some of my writing. And he said, why aren't you published? And I said, I don't know how to go about it. And he said, this is whatever you wrote, write about, go to the nearest magazine in Mexico City when you go back, find out who the editor is, ask for an appointment, go talk to him, show him your writing. I did just that. It never occurred to me that editors are people, they are accessible. They're not a name on a magazine. They're people. And because of this experience I had in dealing with a lot of strangers traveling on assignment, I made an appointment. Now, I was lucky in the sense that I was known in Mexico City as a model, so it was easier for me to get an appointment. But nevertheless, I just had a recent experience with my latest book, where by sheer persistence, I got what I wanted. So I'm going to go back. I went to the first magazine editor and showed him some of my writing. And he said, it was in English, he said, translate it into Spanish and we'll publish it. So the first thing they published was about 3 or 4 poems. So at that time, I was also writing poetry. Another editor for a very important magazine in Mexico City, which was a magazine like the New Yorker magazine, called me up and said, I saw your poems. Would you like to do some articles for us? I said, sure. What do you need? Now, he needed 2 things. One was no Mexican writer, male or female, could write about touchy subjects in Mexico like abortion. When I was a foreigner, I could do whatever I wanted. So he sent me around to figure out how you could get an abortion in a place where abortion is illegal. When they published the article, it was like a 15-page article. They put it in the middle of the magazine into a section that was actually sealed. So the only way somebody could read the article is to buy the magazine. I did a number of topics like this, and then he invented another way for me to write, which was to create a series of questions and go to people who were very high up in either government or in the arts or in engineering or whatever, and ask the same questions of people who had totally opposing points of view. And then we would publish their picture and the questions and their answers. And people loved this because it created a lot of controversy and talk and whatever. While I was doing that, he said, you take the pictures of these people. Now, I didn't know how to hold a camera. even though I was working with a photographer. So at that time, cameras were very serious business, and you have to know what lens and what film to use. And, so I said, I don't know what I'm doing. Al gave me a camera. He loaded the right film, and he said, go take a picture of them. Now, because my background was in theater, I knew how to look at people, how to take very good dramatic expressions, but I didn't know how to use a camera. So the first time I did that, I interviewed a very important television personality, and I said to him, oh, I have a camera with me, but I don't have the lights. He had brought in the lights from his studio. He asked people to help out. So I saw how they were lighting him up. All I had to do is push the button. That created a kind of curiosity for me. So from there on, every time I went on assignment around Europe with Albert Mulvey, he wouldn't let me read while he was taking pictures. And sometimes we would spend half an hour to 3 hours waiting for a light. He'd say, watch the light, watch the scene, watch this, watch that. I said, okay, but if you give me a camera, and he had a bunch of lenses in his camera bag, I started experimenting by looking through each lens to see the different looks a camera could create. That's how I began to learn photography. The first roll of film I shot, he threw out because it was terrible. And I said, well, why didn't I get what you got? He said, because you have to learn how to see through the camera, not through your head. Very different. Now, relating to that, in modern times, I practically don't have to take pictures anymore because everybody has a camera on their phone. But one of the references I will give you is online, you can actually learn. There's a course even National Geographic is giving now. You can learn how to use your camera to take great pictures. So photography has become so universal that every time I turn around, somebody's taking a picture of somebody with their phone. So it's no longer an issue, but you still have to learn how to frame, what exposure you should use. And sometimes if your not your camera, but your phone doesn't do the right thing, it is on your computer, you can edit it to make it look good. So photography is no longer an issue if you learn how to compose so that your pictures are looking correctly. Now, back to publishing. Once my articles were published, and I want to show you, I actually started, as we were traveling, I started publishing in different magazines around the world. This one was for a American Express magazine, and it's an article about Indonesia, a special part of Indonesia, Toraja land, where they build houses with very strange roofs, and the people are very interesting, and they have extremely unique funeral practices. And the article just came naturally because all I had to do is tell the story of what we saw, what I saw. From that came another article in West Java. And when we were in West Java, we met somebody, and it was just a casual meeting, and he invited, Al went off to take some pictures, and I went for coffee with him, and he said to me, how would you like to do a book for my company? No, my company would sponsor the book, but this would be a book for the governor of East Java. I said to myself, how do I do that? But I didn't tell him that. I said, what do you need? And he said, we would like you to feature the industry that we have in East Java to attract investors. Now, this was as far from my head. I am not a business person. I can't count to 5. So I said, yes, I think we can do that. Because what I thought of was this: by that time, I had written a number of articles, and I thought, how different can a book be from an article? It's just a bunch of articles put together of the information that the people need. So in the meantime, I flew home on a Friday, and I got a phone call. I got home on Saturday because it takes 24 hours to fly home from Indonesia. And on Saturday evening, I got a phone call and said, I spoke to the head of the company. This happened to be the biggest cigarette company in Indonesia. They produced clove cigarettes, which is regular cigarettes with cloves, aromatic cigarettes, basically. At that time, everybody smoked. So this was like in the 80s. And he said, I spoke to the head of the company. They will sponsor the book, give us a price. Al was still in Indonesia. So I called him and I said, don't come home, meet us in Jakarta, because we're being offered a book contract and I don't want to deal with this alone. So this was on a Saturday. I flew back Sunday night, arrived Monday morning for a meeting. Al met me there. We landed with a book contract. We were going to go around East Java for a couple of months. I was going to get all the information from all the officials that they needed to portray in the book. And Al and I were going to take the pictures. Now, when we got finished with the book, it took us a year to do this. And I brought it with me. It's a big, heavy book, because I thought you should see the volume and the look of the book. It was very complicated. When we finished the book, all I did was send them the text and the pictures, because they said they had somebody who would actually design the book inside out. I said, fine. So I sent them the book. They were very impressed with the content. They were amazed. They didn't think we were able to do such a thorough job of featuring every industry, every place on earth that was in East Java. And then I send them this thing, and a couple of weeks later, they call me and they say, would you be able to supervise the design and printing of the book? Because we don't like the person who is working for us, and he is in Singapore. And we want you to go to Singapore and take over the printing process and the design of the book. Can you do that? Now, up to that point, I have never printed a thing, because all I would do is send an article to a magazine. And we actually, somewhere in between, we had a series of books that we published. And again, the publisher published the book. So we had nothing to do with the physical creation of a book. So me being me, I said, yes, I can do that. And I asked Al if he wanted to go and do this, because he worked for National Geographic originally. By this time, he had left the Geographic. He was only on contract with them for 6 months out of the year. And the rest of the time, we were doing our own books. And he said, no, you go. I'll stay at home and work on these other books that we have to deliver to the publisher. So I packed my bags again, took off for Singapore, and went to the biggest printing house in the city. And went to the head of the printing house and I said, I have a problem, I have a project, and I need help putting it together. Here is the material, what do we do? So basically, instead of saying, I don't know what I'm doing, I said, how do you do this? What will you do with this?
So he explained to me, at that time you were shooting slides. So he said the slides have to be color separated. So the pictures can be created from the different colors that are in the slide. And then we print them. And of course, the text has to be formatted and printed. And you can select the typeface that you want for the look of the book, the whole design of the book. Being an artist, I figured, yeah, I can do this because I have a good sense of design. So sure enough, about a month later, I was standing by the printing press with books that were formatted, all the pictures were in place, and designed a cover for it. And then I would stand there and say to the printer, there was this huge machine with different colors. And I'd say, can you bump up this color and lower that color so that it's more obvious what we're doing? You know, like I want her to have really red hat or whatever she was wearing, and you know, make her face the right color skin instead of red. So I learned, actually by doing this, I learned how the printing process worked. After that, we did a couple more books in Indonesia, all in a very strange fashion. For example, at that time, we were doing something to make a living that nobody else was doing. We were the first ones who created photography trips around the world, where we were teaching at that time photography at UCLA, called Photographing the National Geographic Way. So people would say, would you give us private classes? Would you teach us photography? And instead we said, yeah, we would teach you photography, but the way we do it is we travel. We don't stay at home and take pictures. We go around the world and take pictures in different locations. So we created, through a friend who was a travel agent, different trips around the world. One of them was, for example, the first one was in Nepal. Very exotic, incredibly exotic location. I'm going to have you come afterwards and come up and look at these things so that you can see what I'm talking about. This was Nepal. Just to show you this. And so we're sitting on the plane after finishing the East Java book on a trip back to Indonesia. And we had a book with us. And one of our tour members was looking at the book, and next to him was sitting a man who said, what's that book about East Java? And he looked at it and he said, wow, who did this? And the woman said, oh, they're sitting over there. It's that couple that does these books. He got up, came over to us and said, I work with the governor of Irian Jaya, which is today called Papua. And I think my governor would be very interested in having a book like this of our state. Indonesia is divided into 23 states. And so they wanted a book for their state to attract investment. So we finished our tour in Indonesia. During that tour, I, again, flew to Irian Jaya with, I think Al came with me at that time. After we finished our tour, we sent everybody home. We went to this God's forsaken island, Papua, where at the time when we were there, let me show you a picture of what was our reception there. We got off the plane and we were greeted by maybe 25 to 30 men, stark naked, except for a penis cord, which covered their penis and stood out. And they had little strings around their butt to hold it up. And they had a lot of conch shells around their neck. And the more conch shells they had, the more important their role was. This was the greeting committee. So it was truly one of the world's most unusual, undeveloped areas. The governor, of course, was educated. I'm looking for a picture to show you that, was educated in Jakarta. So he was, okay, this is just one of the pictures from that place.
What time period are you talking about?
I'm talking about 1985.
That late?
Yeah. Well, they're still like that. Except now, because of this book, industry has moved in and ruined their culture. But at that time, it was an unbelievably primitive culture. But one of the most interesting things that happened during our shoot there, we spent about 6 weeks shooting and gathering information. We were taken up to a hillside where the local people gathered salt. It was like a salt lake, and they would go up there like once a week, once a month to bring salt home. And it was steep like this. So they gathered all the children in the village to help us. They held our hands to go up there because it was raining and slippery. And while we were going up there, the chief went over to Al and said, how much for your wife? I want to buy your wife for my wife. Now, we knew, because before going to a place, we studied the culture, that the highest price, bride price, paid by a groom for a wife was 5 pigs. And, you know, if the wife was worth that much, she was a chief's wife. So Al said to the man, oh, she's white, so she's worth 10 pigs. Because you'll have a white wife. He said, no, 8 pigs.
Pigs, P-I-G-S?
P-I-G-S, pigs, oink oinks. Yes, that was their food. They raised pigs to eat. So pigs were very valuable. And it's like a dowry, 5 pigs, 10 pigs. So of course they were joking. Al wasn't going to sell me or leave me there, and he wasn't going to buy me. But what I discovered in that particular point in culture are two very important things. One is they knew exactly when we needed help walking, so we wouldn't fall on our butts in the mud on the hillside. We didn't have to ask for help. They knew. And the other thing is that they had a fabulous sense of humor. So they were no different mentally from any one of us, even though they lived in huts, and they had a communal hut where they gathered every evening. The wives lived in their own huts, and if the husband wanted to visit her, he put his shoes in front of her door, and then the kids were put with some other relatives, and he could go visit the wife and sleep with her. So it was a totally different culture. And yet, it was no different in terms of the way the people behaved. That was a very important lesson, because we could function in any culture. Now, I don't know how many of you, write books about your own cultures or you invent stories, but you have to realize no matter who you write about, they have the same feelings you do. And if you tell a good story, you'll tell their feelings. You tell us, the readers, how they feel, what they're thinking and how they feel. Because if you don't do that, we don't get to know the person, and we have no empathy for that person. Then we can't figure out why we should read that story. So after the 3rd book on Indonesia, we also did a book on photography, how to travel photographer's handbook. We used this at UCLA as a textbook. And somebody somewhere saw a book on Indonesia, a Chinese company, and invited us to do a book on they had a theme park in China, in Shenzhen, and they were building a theme park in Florida. And they said, we would like you to do a book for the opening of the theme park in Florida. And it should feature different local people in China, nationalities, different nationalities. So we went to Shenzhen in China. And I have to tell you, every country I worked in for 3 months, I learned enough of their language, whatever language it was, so I could get along and get directions and communicate. I couldn't do that in China. I couldn't learn the proper intonation of the language. But we had great help. I sat with a folk tale expert who gave me stories about these different people. Let me show you. I mean, this is my favorite book, by the way, because we learned 24 different cultures in China through this. And the book consists of 5 children visiting a theme park, which is what we were writing about, and learning about the different cultures in China. And we combined photography and illustration. And there's a story that each place we visited, there's a story of theirs in the book, plus the story of the 5 children. So it's a very complex design for the cultural theme park that they were opening. And in fact, the interesting thing was about a year after that, I went to Putnam, who was our first publisher for this book, Making Love Work, which I co-wrote with a psychiatrist. And I said to Putnam, I've got this book. Would you be interested in republishing it under Putnam's name? And they looked at it and they said, oh no, it's already done. We want to have all the fun. We want to do the illustrations. Besides, we would never print a children's book that combines drawing and photography. I said, okay. The year after, they started publishing books that combined photography and drawings. So when we finished this book, they said, oh, but this is for adults and older children. Can you do something for us for young children? So I came up with this idea of a costume design book cut out. These are the same 5 children who went to the theme park originally in the original book. And I created paper doll figures with costumes, 3 costumes for each character that children could then take out, just push out, no need to use scissors, and play with it.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So, for instance, how did you get that published? That I was just thinking, because my guess is people maybe have different kinds of books they've written, and you're so good at being flexible, so you hear a no. So I'm just curious, is that through a publisher that you did the dolls?
Yeah, I hired a Chinese artist who illustrated both books for me. Then I went to Singapore and had both books printed.
You did that yourself?
I did that myself. Over the process of doing the books on Indonesia, I'm glad you asked that question, because there is a process and it developed over the years very differently. But yeah, I better explain this. The first book was color separation. The publisher did the print design, everything. The second book, I met somebody who said to me, you can do all this online now. You don't have to do this in a printing house. So they helped me do the book on Irian Jaya, Papua. And in the process, I learned word processing, color separation on the computer with Photoshop. So this third book, I did entirely by myself on Photoshop, and just knowing how to do the color separation in Photoshop and learning the design. There are a number of book designing programs today. I had a very complicated one, which I have listed for you. But basically, over the 3 books, I learned enough to design every one of these books, including the Chinese books. And that is what you can do today.
If you don't want me to ask another.
No, please.
So let's say I have something that I want to say. So I have a story, and the way you started with stories and books, but I'm not sure what to do with it. See, I want to get it out there. Do you think that, to say if I'm a poet, or maybe I've written an article, or I know a lot of people are writing genealogy and biographies.
Yeah.
Does it matter what you're writing, or do you think it's important just to get it out there? Or so
Yeah.
I notice now, and then I'll be private, that you're now with all your experience, you just are working on a book that's more autobiographical. Do you find that that is something that you could sell, or that people are interested in, or does it?
Absolutely.
If you have an idea, do you just go and put it out there? Is that what you're
Okay.
suggesting?
How many of you have heard of Amazon? Amazon today is one of the biggest publishers of personal books, individual books, and Kindle. The difference is that when you sign up with Kindle, depending on what program you sign up on, they want you to either be exclusive with them for the first 3 months or not. But Kindle and Amazon are now one company, basically. So when you publish with Amazon, they ask you, you want to put it on Kindle also, and they will put it on Kindle. So the only thing is, Amazon will have a program where you can design, they will help you design the book. I brought a list of references, because if you're not experienced in book design and Amazon designs your book, it will look very poorly. It really will. Yes, because they're not designers. They will take Word, the program, the word processing program Word, and put your book on Amazon as an ebook, looking like it was typed at home. Very little design. You know, it will be divided into chapters, but the pages will run uneven. The lines sometimes have holes in it between words. So it's not very attractive. There are a number of people, Upwork, for example, Fiverr, they help you design the book. So all you have to do is then put it online and it looks professional. As nobody's going to read a book that looks like you just typed it yesterday. So that's a very important thing that today, what I wanted to finish with is that you can now do this. So I'm glad you brought this up. You know, publishing went from publishers to now self-publishing, back to the ancient ways of taking power back from these people. I have to tell you, for example, Skywriters, which is a book about Ethiopia, basically, and pilots dropping food off in starving regions in Ethiopia. And it contains a lot of the Ethiopian culture, because I was there and I learned about Ethiopia and wrote a romance book about it. Now, this romance book company is the largest romance book publishing house in the world, Harlequin. My book was the book of the month in Australia. It's translated into 4 or 5 languages, 2 different versions in Italian, French, Japanese, I don't know what else. You know what? They gave me an advance. And when the book sold like crazy, they never gave me another cent. They said, oh, the book didn't make back the advance. They sent me a few dollars for the different translations, but not all of them. And I never got a copy of the Japanese version. They didn't have it. They ran out of it. Well, if they ran out of it, they must have made money on it. I never saw a cent. This is why I will not, even though I have, you know, big publishers like Putnam and Ballantine publishing my books, I don't want to publish with them. I'm working on my 26th book, Liar's Paradise. and I will self-publish it online. If a publisher wants to approach me afterwards and says, we'd like to republish your book, I'll think about it because of the prestige. But you know what? After 26 books, I don't care about the prestige. I want to get the book out the way I want it out.
Do you do a printed version as well, or do you think?
I will
online is
have
the
a
way to
print
go?
version, yes, absolutely. Now, here's the other thing. The online publishers facilitate paperback or hardback publishing as well. You can tell them, I want a hardback copy, I want a paperback copy, and I want the online copy. The hardback and the paperback requires design. And they will help you with the design. This list that I'm giving you, there is one company that will actually teach you how to go through the entire process of self-publishing in different lessons from beginning to end. Talks about how to hire an agent, an editor, what you need. This is why I didn't want to go into those details because it's a very complex procedure. For example, for my latest book, I wrote the book, then I had 3 editors help me correct the language, take out repetitions, etc., etc. I am now doing final editing, and then I'm going to have another editor read it because it's very important for me to have good, easily read text. I want to tell a story, and I want to tell it so people enjoy reading it. These people, the list I'm giving you, are professionals doing that for authors who want to self-publish. The odd thing is that big publishers today tell you, we won't accept your book unless you bring it to us already edited. You used to pay for editors. Now you have to pay for your own editor. They used to pay for publicity. Now you have to hire your own public agency to do that. So what is the point? Unless you want the prestige of saying, and very famous authors, of course, don't care, so they go with big publishers because their books are publicized and sell hundreds and hundreds of copies. But if you're a new author, and unless you have a sensational subject and writing style, they're not going to do a thing for you. If your book is published by a publisher and goes into a bookstore and doesn't become a big seller within a month, the leftover books are sent back to the publisher and you get paid for it. You pay for that. So today's publishing world has really turned upside down and has given the power back. What?
How do you mean if the books don't sell, they get sent back to the publisher?
Yes.
And we personally pay for it?
Either you pay for it or the publisher remainders them, which means they put it on a junk pile somewhere and you can buy it for 10 cents a piece. So it's become a real switch in terms of publishing because of the internet. You actually have the power to publish your own book. And it's not simple. And this is why I'm standing here giving you a process. You write the book, you edit the book, you design the book, you put it online, and Amazon will actually give you most of the price for the book. In other words, they give you a much higher payment. They take a very small percentage, something like 2 or 3%. I don't remember. They keep changing it. The more successful they become, the higher percentage they want from your book. Yes.
As regards the editing, I was asking 2 days ago with ChatGPT. I asked ChatGPT, the AI, whether he or she will be able to edit if I give an essay. He said, I didn't hide it, but he said he will. I'm taking the liberty, but he doesn't say he says they, okay? So I'm using the ChatGPT to figure out how much I can do with the help of this ChatGPT. New York Times reporter recently last week saying that people are using ChatGPT and to publishing like crazy.
Yes.
On Kindle.
Yes.
And with the price of $1 or $2.
Yeah, but how good is the editing?
I haven't tried it.
Well,
Yeah,
look
one
at
of,
it.
no, I gave a paragraph which I have written and then, but if you give a long essay, but he won't go through completely. So I'm trying to figure out each paragraph I will give.
I see.
Read
I
and then see
see.
how I haven't tried it. I'm using ChatGPT for the last 2 weeks for so many things now. Okay.
Okay.
So, like you said, that you went to Jakarta, I want to talk about business. So if you ask ChatGPT, he will give you his own version. You don't have to do any research.
Yeah, but once
But
it's
then
done,
There are mistakes.
okay, that's what I was gonna say.
But
You have
he
to
has a
check it.
disclaimer saying the human has to revise it. I'm just a machine.
Okay. Well, of course, the point is that ultimately you still have to look at
Right.
your text
Yeah.
and finish editing it before you put it online. Otherwise, you look bad as an author.
Correct.
But any method you can find today that helps you edit your book, if you approve their editing, you're fine.
One other thing I noticed was if you give a sentence, I have some quotations or
Yeah.
thoughts I have developed over the years, or 60 of them. I did the explanation by the ChatGPT with the 1 page, 1.5 page on each item. Comes out to be 100 pages now.
Uh-huh.
But then if you ask to explain, I put it like this, explain in detail. Okay, you have to put a minimum number of words so the computer will pick up.
Yeah.
So if I ask again, he give you a 1 page, but I ask again on the same thing, he will give the same thing, but it's entirely different method.
Really?
Yeah, that's interesting. So then I may have to put both together and I myself edit it.
That's
So that's
right.
a good way of doing it.
That's right. Well, the control goes back to you as an author, ultimately. And what your book reads like depends on you. Yes, I can't hear you.
But you said there are tutorials that go through the process from start to finish and finding an agent and doing all this stuff. Where is that?
Finish one.
You mentioned instructions that you can find online for
Yes.
the whole process of finding an agent. and all this stuff.
Yes.
Where is that?
I'll give you the sheet.
Okay.
Let me hand that out.
Okay, start here and start handing out.
Yeah, I didn't want to dictate it, so I had,
May I ask, is your book a nonfiction?
No, I haven't written any book so far.
Like, I mean,
I have all these ideas over the 40 years. I have written articles and editorials.
are they nonfiction or?
No, I just any
Just
subject.
stories?
No, I'm a retired doctor.
Doctor?
Yeah,
Oh,
but
interesting.
actually, I worked on to write a book
Mhm.
criticizing the science in medicine.
Uh-huh.
Okay, the process. I think the title was Confessions of a Confused Doctor.
Oh,
Fraud, frivolous, falsified, is not fraudulent clinical trial. But then 2014, I tried to figure out if I can get any publishing company because I'm not famous or
You don't
notorious either. So nobody is going to accept. They will say, okay, send it goes to the Japanese. I said, okay.
No. I just edited a book for a psychiatrist during COVID. I was sitting at home working on my own book, and I got a phone call from a psychiatrist. Somebody recommended me to him, and I spent a year rewriting, in fact, his book. Just chapters, each chapter a different idea from his practice of 30 years. So you can do the same thing, just different chapters of your whatever you want to talk about. Yeah, the thing is, you actually have to sit down and organize your material and decide what goes with what and divide it into readable chapters. For example, it used to be that a book would have 30 pages per chapter. My latest book started with 30 pages. Now it's taking me forever to divide it. Each 30 pages, I'm dividing into 3-4 pages because people have much shorter attention span. So each chapter will now be 3 or 4 pages, and at a point where I know the reader will want to know what happens next. To create interest in the book, then the next chapter comes up. So that's what you have to do. Each subject you want to write about is a chapter, and talk only about the essence of it. But the other thing is, when you start with a chapter, you have to create interest. So your first couple of sentences have to make the reader curious. What's going to happen next? And then tell the story, and then finish with something that the reader can stay with, think about. Or go to the next chapter.
My question was, how do you get the publisher read your manuscript?
Look at the list.
Okay.
It is the essence of writing for a newspaper too. The first paragraph has to be to catch the reader's interest. Follow up, because otherwise I put it away.
Exactly.
I'm doing it now for 40 years and I'm still in the business. So it means that my first paragraph is something that people are interested in.
Yes, yes.
The book is the same thing.
It's exactly the
You have
same.
to touch the eye of the.
The trick with a book is that every chapter has to have an interesting beginning, an interesting end to make you want to go to the next chapter. And in the middle, you give the information in such a way that people stay with the story. They want to know what happens.
I was thinking, so your the book you're working on now is a fictionalized autobiography. Like, how do you make the decision that you, it's like with your story, you could have done a autobiography, like a straight narrative, but you chose to make it more of a fictionalized story. What was that like? Was it, why would you do that rather than just do a straight interesting history?
Well, it's very simple. I could not tell my personal story in first person of my memories because of the style of the story. I wrote about my mother's marriage. I wrote about her feelings. I didn't want to say, and she said, and he said. But because I could say, I could tell it like a story. So it's a new genre. It's called fictionalized biography. And I actually, let's put it this way, I did not invent any of the events. I described exactly what happened. I may not quote them exactly, but I gave the dialogue that goes with the event, which is obviously a little distance from when it happened. So I have to recreate in my head how they may have said something. But other than that, it's a true story. And I will say at the beginning of this book that this is my life story, my family story, but it was too hard for me to write it in first person, so I wrote it as if it were a novel.
So it will be like a third person describing, right?
Yeah. You have another question?
No, just was asking.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yes.
What's your take on,
Can you speak up, please?
sorry, what is your take on publishing children's books, something that really have chapters?
You know, there are many children's book publishers. One of the things you should do with your genre is go online and put in children's book publishers, and they'll all come up. Now, there are also conferences, writers' conferences that you can go to, meet agents, meet authors, meet publishers. If your book, make appointments to actually sit down and talk with them. And if your book is of interest to them, they'll make you an offer. So that's another way to go.
Do you have something, do you have to have something in hand for a meeting, or can you just?
No, you talk about it. It's
Oh,
smart to
good
have
idea.
something in hand. And what you usually have in hand is maybe your accomplishments, your biography, a list of your what qualifies you to do this book. And then if it's fiction, they want an outline and first 3 chapters. If it's nonfiction, the same thing.
So you don't need to have that manuscript.
No, not the whole manuscript, no. Just, no, for fiction, it's 1 chapter and a chapter by chapter description, an outline, like a table of contents. For nonfiction, 3 chapters and an outline. So anyway, any other, you're welcome to come up and look. And I think time is up.
Thank you.